Nebraska Territory, 1868. The settlers gathered around the stake, torches blazing in the darkness. Sarah Mitchell stood bound, tears streaming down her face. They'd already killed her family for the gold claim. Now they wanted to make sure no witnesses remained. But they didn't see the lone rider watching from the shadows. Caleb Stone had given up his badge years ago, but not his sense of right and wrong. His fingers tightened on his rifle as he counted the men, 30 against 1. Bad odds for them. The war had taught him how to deal with cruel men, and tonight these settlers would learn that lesson the hard way. Justice was coming, and it rode a midnight stallion. But what made this mysterious ex-lawman risk everything for a stranger, and how did his actions that night change the frontier forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 1 week earlier, Thomas Mitchell wiped sweat from his brow as he held the gold nugget up to the morning sun. The creek bed glittered with promise, each flash of yellow in the water matching the hope in his weathered face. He'd struck it rich. After 3 long years of backbreaking work, his claim had finally paid off. "Sarah," he called out, his voice carrying across the gentle stream. "Sarah, come see this." Sarah Mitchell emerged from the tree line, her simple cotton dress catching on brambles as she made her way down to the creek. At 16, she had her mother's grace and her father's determination. Her dark hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, and her hands were rough from helping work the land. "What is it, Pa?" She stopped short when she saw the nugget gleaming in his palm. "Is that gold?" Thomas confirmed, grinning. "And there's more where this came from. We'll be able to build your mother that proper house she's always wanted. Maybe even send you back east for schooling." Neither of them noticed the shadow that passed behind the trees or the figure that slipped away toward town. By noon, word had spread through Morgan's Creek like wildfire. Thomas Mitchell had struck gold on his claim. The saloon buzzed with whispered conversations and dark looks. In the corner, James Hawkins, the largest landowner in the territory. Diaz sat with his group of hired men, his face a mask of calculated greed. "Mitchell's land borders mine," Hawkins said, running a finger along the rim of his whiskey glass. "Been trying to buy him out for 2 years now. Stubborn fool wouldn't sell." Wade Turner, Hawkins' right-hand man, leaned forward. "Maybe he'll sell now. Gold fever makes men reasonable." "Make him an offer," another man suggested. "A fair one, even." Hawkins' laugh was cold as winter frost. "Why pay for what you can take?" The first warning came that afternoon. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw the riders approaching, 5 men, Hawkins at their head. She dropped the wet sheet and ran inside to warn her parents. Rebecca Mitchell, Sarah's mother, was at the stove, stirring a pot of stew. The gold deed lay on the table where Thomas had been examining it. Sarah watched her father fold the paper carefully and slip it into the family Bible for safekeeping. "Mr. Mitchell," Hawkins called from outside. "Just want to talk business." Thomas shared a look with his wife, then stepped onto the porch. Sarah watched through the window as Hawkins dismounted, all fake smiles and false courtesy. "Heard about your good fortune," Hawkins said. "Thought we might discuss a partnership, or a sale if you prefer." "This land's not for sale, James. You'd know that." "Everything's for sale, Thomas, just a matter of price." Hawkins pulled out a piece of paper. $5,000, more than fair. Thomas didn't even look at the offer. "My answer's no. This is my family's future." "Future's a funny thing," Hawkins said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Never know what tomorrow might bring." He mounted up, tipping his hat to Sarah in the window. "Think on it, Thomas. Offer won't last forever." That night, Sarah overheard her parents talking in low voices by the fireplace. "We should send for the marshal," Rebecca was saying. "You know Hawkins won't stop here." "Marshal's 3 days' ride away," Thomas replied. "Besides, we've got the deed. Law's on our side." "Law's awful far away out here," Rebecca said softly. Sarah clutched her mother's Bible to her chest, feeling the deed paper rustle inside its pages. She thought about the look in Hawkins' eyes, the way his men had sized up their cabin. Her father was right. They'd worked too hard to give up now. But her mother was right too. The law was a distant thing out here on the frontier. She fell, asleep that night to the sound of coyotes in the distance, not knowing that worse predators were already gathering in the shadows of Morgan's Creek. The next morning dawned cold and grey. Sarah watched storm clouds gathering over the distant mountains as she fed the chickens, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in her bones. Her mother's Bible sat heavy in her apron pocket. She'd taken to carrying it everywhere, the precious deed still hidden within its pages. In Morgan's Creek, darker clouds were gathering. The back room of Hawkins' office was thick with pipe smoke and scheming. A dozen men hunched around a scarred oak table, passing a bottle of whiskey between them. Wade Turner spread out a rough map of the Mitchell property. "Thomas makes his supply run tomorrow," Turner said, jabbing a finger at the trail leading to town. "Rebecca usually stays home with the girl. Cabins isolated, no neighbors for miles." Hawkins took a long draw on his pipe. "Anyone asking questions?" "Killed their dog last night," one of the men offered. "Won't be raising no alarm." Sarah hadn't known why Buck hadn't come home. Now her heart ached with understanding as she crept away from the office window, her hands trembling. She'd only come to town for sugar and coffee. Instead, she'd stumbled onto murder in the making. She tried to run, but Turner caught her before she reached her horse. Well, he drawled, his grip bruising on her arm. "Looks like we got ourselves a little spy." They dragged her into the office. Hawkins looked up from his pipe, eyes cold as a snake's. "Shame," he said. "Would have preferred to handle this clean. Lock her in the cellar. We move tonight." The cellar was dark and damp, thick with the smell of earth and rot. Sarah pulled her mother's Bible from her pocket, running her fingers over its worn leather cover. Inside, the deed felt like it was burning through the pages. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Hours passed like years. Through the floorboards above, she heard them planning her family's murder. "No survivors," Hawkins was saying. "Can't have any loose ends." Sarah worked frantically at the rusted cellar lock with a nail she'd found, bloodying her fingers in the process. As sunset painted the sky crimson, the lock finally gave way with a soft click. The office was empty when she emerged. In the distance, she heard horses. They'd already left for her family's cabin. Sarah ran to the livery stable, but they'd taken or cut loose all the horses. The 3-mile run home stretched before her like an eternity. She ran until her lungs burned, until she tasted blood in her throat. Storm clouds opened above her, turning the dirt road to mud that sucked at her boots. Lightning split the sky, thunder drowning out her desperate prayers. Through sheets of rain, she saw the glow, not lightning, fire. Her home was burning. Sarah burst from the tree line in time to see her father fall, 3 bullets in his chest. Her mother's scream cut off with terrible suddenness. Rough hands seized Sarah before she could reach either of them. "Found the little bird," Turner called out, twisting her arm behind her back. "Flew right home to the nest." Hawkins dismounted, mud splashing beneath his boots. He took the Bible from Sarah's pocket, flipping through its pages until the deed fluttered to the ground. The rain had turned it to pulp, her father's signature bleeding into illegibility. "Shame about the deed," Hawkins said, tossing the Bible into the mud. "Terrible accident. Whole family burned alive when their lamp tipped over. These things happen on the frontier." Sarah spat in his face. The backhand split her lip, but she smiled through bloody teeth. "People will know. Dead. Girls tell no tales." Hawkins nodded to his men. "Get the stake ready. Make it look like the savages did it." As they dragged her toward the burning cabin, Sarah saw her mother's Bible in the mud. Its pages lay open to Psalms, words of vengeance and justice slowly washing away in the rain. Thunder crashed overhead as Hawkins' men bound Sarah to the wooden stake. Her father's pocket watch lay shattered in the mud nearby, its hands frozen at 9:47. The moment the first bullet had struck him, she could still hear his final words. "Run, Sarah!" But there had been nowhere to run. The rain had slackened to a cold drizzle, but the cabin still burned hot enough to sear her skin. Through the flames, she could see her mother's body crumpled on the porch. Rebecca Mitchell's final act had been to reach for her daughter. Now, her outstretched hand accused the night sky. "Get that fire higher," Hawkins ordered, gesturing to the stake. "Need it to look like Indians did this," Turner approached with a torch. "Want me to make her scream? More authentic that way." "No time for games," Hawkins snapped. "Marshall's due for his monthly visit tomorrow. Need this done and cleaned up." Sarah tested her bonds, feeling the rope bite into her wrists. Her father had taught her about knots, about finding the weak spots. But these were tied by men who'd done this before. The thought made her stomach turn. How many other families had met this fate? Through the rain and tears, she caught glimpses of the men's faces. Some she recognized from town. Pete, the blacksmith, who'd always tipped his hat to her mother. Young Jim Carson, who'd asked her to dance at last year's harvest festival. Now they stood in the firelight with murder in their eyes, transformed by greed into monsters. "Found this in the house," one of the men called out, emerging from the burning cabin with her father's strongbox. The metal glowed from the heat as they pried it open, revealing the small fortune in gold dust and nuggets that had sealed her family's fate. Hawkins divided the spoils with mechanical efficiency. Equal shares, as agreed. Anyone gets drunk and talks. "Remember, you're all in this now, all guilty." "What about the claim itself?" Turner asked, pocketing his share. "Already got buyers interested. By the time anyone investigates, the ashes will be cold." Hawkins turned to Sarah. "Nothing personal, girl, just business." Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "My father was right about you. Nothing but a coward hiding behind hired killers." The blow came fast, stars exploding behind her eyes. Through blurred vision, she saw Hawkins rubbing his knuckles. "Get it done," he ordered. "Make sure she burns with the rest." The men began piling wood around her feet. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to remember her mother's prayers, her father's laugh. Anything but this moment. The heat grew closer. Smoke, stinging her lungs. A horse nickered in the darkness beyond the firelight. Sarah's eyes snapped open. Through the gaps between her tormentors, she caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darker than the night, watching from the tree line. Turner saw it too. "Someone out there." "Probably just a deer," Hawkins said. "Get on with it." But Sarah had seen more than a shadow. She'd seen the glint of a rifle barrel, the outline of a rider whose stillness spoke of patient violence. Hope bloomed dangerous in her chest. "Hurry up," Hawkins urged, suddenly uneasy. Perhaps he felt it too, the weight of judgment gathering in the darkness. The first torch touched the kindling at her feet. Sarah didn't scream. She was her father's daughter, and she would meet death with his courage. But as the flames began to catch, she saw something that made her smile through her tears. The shadow in the darkness had moved closer, and now she could see the rider clearly. A man in a long duster, rifle held ready, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He sat his horse with the easy grace of a veteran warrior, and even at this distance, she could feel the cold fury radiating from him. The night was about to be painted in blood, and Sarah Mitchell would live to see justice done. 3 hours earlier, Caleb Stone had been following a trail of corruption that led him to Morgan's Creek. The cavalry saber at his hip, a remnant of darker days, felt heavier than usual as he rode through the gathering storm. Lightning illuminated the tracks ahead, multiple horses riding hard, heading toward an isolated homestead. He'd seen this pattern before. During the war, he'd learned to read violence in the land like others read books. The dead dog by the creek, the nervous faces in town, the whispered conversations that stopped when he entered the saloon, all signs pointing to the same ugly conclusion. "Easy, Shadow," he murmured to his stallion as thunder rolled overhead. The horse's ears flicked back, sensing his rider's tension. Caleb had found the notice in the last town, warnings about claim jumpers working the territory. He'd followed their trail across 3 states, counting the burning homesteads and shallow graves they left behind. The rain masked his approach as he tracked the riders. Through breaks in the weather, he caught glimpses of their handiwork. Broken branches, fresh hoofprints, a child's doll dropped in haste. The story was written in the mud, for those who knew how to read it. When he heard the first gunshots, Caleb spurred Shadow forward. But distance and weather were against him. By the time he crested the ridge overlooking the Mitchell homestead, the cabin was already ablaze. He pulled out his brass spyglass, another war relic. Through its rain-streaked lens, he counted 30 men, too many for a straight fight, even for him. But numbers hadn't stopped him at Shiloh, and they wouldn't. Stop him now. Caleb's hand unconsciously touched the spot where his badge used to be. 5 years as a marshal, trying to bring law to the frontier. 5 years of watching corrupt men twist that law to their own ends. He'd turned in his badge the day he realized the law was just another weapon for the powerful to use against the weak. Now he worked alone, following the darker trails, hunting men who thought themselves beyond justice. His war-learned skills served a new purpose. The tactics he'd used against Confederate raiders now helped him track a different kind of enemy. Men who hid their evil behind respectability and greed. Through the spyglass, he watched them drag the girl to the stake. Young, but with a spine. Of steel she hadn't broken. He'd seen that same defiant courage in other prisoners during the war. Some spirits couldn't be crushed, only released. Shadow shifted beneath him, eager for action. The stallion had been a cavalry horse too. And he remembered the taste of battle. Caleb patted his neck, considering options. The girl's captors were getting careless, confident in their numbers and isolation. They'd forgotten the fundamental rule of violence. It was never about numbers, but about will. He could see their leader, expensively dressed, giving orders, with the casual arrogance of a man used to being obeyed. The others were hired muscle, desert dogs following a wolf. Cut off the head, and the pack would scatter. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat as he dismounted, moving Shadow back into the trees. The cavalry saber would stay with the horse. This would be work for his rifle and Colt. He checked his weapons with mechanical precision, muscle memory from 1,000 similar moments. The girl saw him first. Even through the rain and firelight, he caught her slight smile. She understood what was coming. Good. That spirit would help her survive what needed to happen next. Caleb took up his position, rifle ready. He'd learned long ago that justice and law weren't always the same thing. Sometimes justice wore a badge and carried papers, and sometimes it came on a midnight horse, dealing in lead and blood. In the growing darkness, he began to count heartbeats, waiting for his moment. Thunder rolled again, closer now. The storm was gathering, and so was he. The first shot came with the thunder. Wade Turner's gun hand exploded in a spray of red, his torch falling harmlessly into the mud. Before the echo died, 2 more men dropped, their surprised expressions frozen in the firelight. "Raiders!" someone shouted, but Caleb was already moving. Years of battle had taught him the value of chaos. Strike hard, strike fast, and let fear do half the work. He emerged from the darkness like a ghost, rifle barking death. The settlers scattered, firing blindly into the night. Amateur mistakes. Every muzzle flash gave him a target, and he made each shot count. Hawkins shouted orders, trying to organize a defense, but panic had already taken hold. These men were bullies, not soldiers. They had never faced an enemy who shot back. Sarah felt the heat of the flames rising around her feet, but her eyes were fixed on her rescuer. He moved like flowing water, each motion precise and deadly. 3 more men fell before they realized he was working his way toward her. "The girl!" Hawkins screamed. "Kill her now!" 2 men rushed the stake with torches. One caught a bullet in the throat. The other made it closer, close enough for Sarah to see the sweat on his face. Then a second shot took him between the eyes, cut her loose. It was the first time she'd heard Caleb's voice, deep and commanding, used to being obeyed. A rifle bullet splintered the wood by her head. Pete the blacksmith appeared through the smoke, knife raised. For a moment, their eyes met. Sarah saw the fear there, the uncertainty. Then his knife came down, not at her, but at the ropes binding her. "Run, girl," he whispered, turning to face Hawkins. "This ain't right and you know it," he shouted across the yard. Hawkins answered with a bullet. Pete fell, his last act of conscience paid for in blood. Sarah's bonds fell away, the burning rope leaving angry welts on her wrists. She stumbled forward, legs numb from being bound. A strong hand caught her arm. Caleb, suddenly beside her, pistol roaring in his other hand. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, finding her feet. "Shadow!" His whistle cut through the gunfire. The midnight stallion burst from the tree line, responding to his master's call. Sarah had never seen a horse move like that. All controlled. Power and deadly grace. Caleb half lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. More bullets whined past, but Shadow seemed to sense their paths, dodging without command. "After them!" Hawkins was mounting his own horse. $1,000 to the man who brings me their heads. "Hold tight," Caleb ordered, and Sarah felt the stallion's muscles bunch beneath them. They exploded forward into the night, hooves thundering against the rain-soaked earth. Behind them, shouts and curses faded into the storm. Sarah caught glimpses. Through the trees, riders following, torches bobbing in the darkness. But Shadow ran like his namesake, eating up the ground with impossible speed. "They're still coming," she warned, counting at least 10 torches. "Good." There was a grim satisfaction in Caleb's voice. Easier to track them down later. They crossed a stream, Shadow never breaking stride. Sarah felt Caleb shift in the saddle, turning to fire his pistol one-handed. A distant cry told her he'd found his mark. "Why?" she asked, having to shout over the wind. "Why help me? Someone has to stand against men like Hawkins." His voice was iron and old pain. "Might as well be me." The pursuit was falling behind now. Shadow's superior speed and Caleb's knowledge of warfare creating an ever-widening gap. But Sarah knew Hawkins wouldn't give up easily. He couldn't afford to, not with what she knew. They rode through the rest of the night, Shadow tireless, Caleb guiding them through paths that seemed to exist only in his mind. As dawn broke, they emerged onto a ridge overlooking Morgan's Creek. Sarah could see smoke still rising from her family's cabin. "We'll make them pay," Caleb promised, reading her thoughts. "All of them." Sarah touched the welts on her wrists, feeling the ghost of burning rope. Good. In the growing light, she studied her rescuer properly for the first time. His face was weathered by sun and hardship, but his eyes were kind despite their sadness. The stallion beneath them finally slowed, sides heaving. "There's a safe place ahead," Caleb said. "Friends who will help. Then we plan our next move." Sarah nodded, understanding growing between them. This wasn't just a rescue, it was the beginning of something larger. Justice hadn't died with her parents, it had just taken a different form. Dawn painted the mountains gold as Caleb guided Shadow through a narrow canyon. Sarah dozed fitfully against his chest, exhaustion finally overwhelming her grief. The canyon opened into a hidden valley where a small cabin nestled against the rocks. Smoke rose from its chimney, a welcome sight after the night's horrors. "Sarah," Caleb's voice was gentle. "We're here." She startled awake, instinctively reaching for reins that weren't there. Then memory flooded back, and she stiffened. "Where is here?" "Friend's place, medicine woman. Learned her craft from both whites and natives." He dismounted, helping her down. "She'll tend those burns." The cabin door opened before they reached it. Morning Dove, 60s, a woman with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that missed nothing, stood in the doorway. She wore a unique blend of native dress and settler's clothing, a medicine pouch at her hip. "Trouble follows you like a shadow, Caleb Stone," she said, but stepped aside to let them enter. The cabin's interior was a curious mixture of worlds, traditional native. Healing implements hung alongside European medical instruments. Dried herbs filled the air with a complex fragrance. "Sit," Morning Dove ordered Sarah, already pulling supplies from her medicine pouch. "Show me your wounds." Sarah hesitated, but Caleb nodded encouragingly. "Trust her. She patched me up after Shiloh." Morning Dove worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning and treating the rope burns on Sarah's wrists and ankles. Her hands were gentle, but her eyes were sharp as she catalogued every injury. "These men," she said, "they will come looking, counting." "On it," Caleb replied, checking his weapons by the window. Morning Dove applied a sweet-smelling salve to Sarah's burns. "The law's bought and paid for," Sarah said bitterly. "Hawkins owns the marshal." "Then you seek a different justice." Morning Dove wrapped clean bandages around Sarah's wrists. "Good. Some wounds need stronger medicine than law provides." Sarah caught her reflection in a hanging mirror, pale, soot-stained but unbroken. "They killed my family, burned our home, all for gold. Gold fever." Morning Dove spat the words like a curse. "Makes monsters of men. Seen it before." "They'll see it again," Caleb said from the window. "Hawkins' type always finds more victims, unless someone stops them." Sarah met his eyes in the mirror. "We'll stop them." Morning Dove finished her work and pressed a small medicine pouch into Sarah's hands. "For the pain, both kinds." She turned to Caleb. "You'll need supplies, food, ammunition." "Already packed," a new voice said. Sarah turned to see a young native man entering through the back door, carrying saddlebags. Young Hawk, 20s, moved, with the same fluid grace as Caleb. "My son," Morning Dove explained. "He watches the trails. No pursuit yet, but they will come." "Thank you," Sarah said, touching the medicine pouch. "Both of you." "Thank us by surviving," Morning Dove replied, "and by ending this evil before it spreads." They rested through the morning, Sarah drifting. Between sleep and waking, she dreamed of fire and justice, of her father's pocket watch marking time until vengeance. When she woke fully, the sun was high. Caleb sat cleaning his rifle, methodical as always. "Feel stronger?" "Yes." It wasn't a lie. Morning Dove's medicine had done its work. "What's our next move?" "Hawkins will expect us to run." Caleb reassembled, his rifle with practiced ease. "So we don't. We hunt." Sarah nodded, understanding growing between them. "Teach me." He studied her for a long moment, seeing past the soot and bandages to the steel beneath. "It won't be easy. Or clean. Nothing. Worthwhile is." She touched her bandaged wrists. "I'm ready to learn." 2 days later, Sarah crouched in the shadow of a boulder, watching Hawkins' men through Caleb's brass spyglass. They were following another false trail, the third one she and Caleb had laid since leaving Morning Dove's cabin. "You were right," she whispered as Caleb moved silently beside her. "Their tracker's using a broken compass, keeps leading them too far north." Caleb nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Man's pride will kill him faster than any bullet." Hawkins hired him for his reputation, not his skill. Below them, the search party argued over tracks that led nowhere. Sarah recognized Turner among them, his bandaged hand a reminder of Caleb's first shot. The man's temper had grown shorter with each failed pursuit. "Turner's losing faith in Hawkins," she observed. "They all are. Fear and greed bind men like that together," Caleb said. "Break one link, the whole chain falls apart." They'd spent the past 2 days learning each other's strengths. Sarah knew the territory, the people, the whispered secrets of Morgan's Creek. Caleb taught her the art of war, how to move unseen, read signs in the land, turn an enemy's strength against him. "Tell me what you see," he prompted, testing her developing skills. Sarah studied the men below. 15 riders, but only 12 horses fresh enough for hard pursuit. They're running low on ammunition. See how they're carrying their rifles. Scared of using shots they can't replace. She shifted the spyglass. And Turner's favoring his right side. That hand's starting to fester. Good. Caleb's approval was quiet, but genuine. What else? They're scared. Not just of us. Of Hawkins. But that fear's starting to crack. She lowered the spyglass. We can use that. They retreated from the ridge, moving through the rocks like shadows. Shadow waited patiently where they'd left him, hidden in a natural hollow. The stallion had proven as skilled at stealth as his master. "Time to move to the next phase?" Sarah asked as they mounted. Caleb checked his pocket watch, not her father's shattered timepiece, but an old cavalry watch that still kept perfect. "Time? Almost. First, we need to understand exactly how deep Hawkins' corruption runs." They rode toward Morgan's Creek, taking a circuitous route that avoided the search parties. Sarah had learned that Caleb never moved directly toward any objective. He approached from angles, gathering information, testing defenses. "The marshal's due in town today," she said. "If he's really in Hawkins' pocket, they'll meet, and we'll be watching." Caleb guided Shadow through a narrow ravine. "Knowledge is better than bullets. Need to know which officials are corrupt, which might still have honor." "Honor," Sarah tasted the word. "Like Pete the blacksmith? Man died trying to do right." Caleb's voice was thoughtful. "Might be others like him. People tired of living under Hawkins' boot." The afternoon sun was falling toward the mountains when they reached their observation point overlooking Morgan's Creek. The town looked unchanged, as if her family's murder had left no mark on its dusty streets. But Sarah saw it differently, now through eyes Caleb had taught her to use. She noticed the nervous glances, the whispered conversations, the way people hurried past Hawkins' office. Fear had soaked into the town's foundations. "There," she pointed. "Marshal's riding in." They watched through the spyglass as Marshal Graves, 50s, dismounted in front of the saloon. His badge gleamed in the sunlight, but his shoulders stooped as if it weighed too heavy. "What do you see?" Caleb asked. Sarah studied the marshal's movements. "He's afraid too. Look how he keeps his hand near his gun, even here, and the way he watches the windows. Man who sold his honor lives in fear of it coming due," Caleb said. "Let's see who he reports to first." They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, Graves slipped into Hawkins' office through the back door. "Now, we know," Sarah said grimly. "Now we know," Caleb agreed, "and knowledge is a weapon sharper than any blade." Night had fallen over Morgan's Creek when Sarah and Caleb made their move. They'd watched Marshal Graves stumble out of the saloon an hour earlier, leaving Hawkins' office unguarded except for a single drowsy deputy. "Remember," Caleb whispered, as they crept through the shadows behind the building, "we're here for information, not revenge, not yet." Sarah nodded, though her heart thundered at being so close to where her captivity had begun. The memory of the cellar made her hands shake, but she forced them steady. Caleb had taught her that emotion was a weapon that cut both ways. The office's back window yielded easily to Caleb's knife. Sarah slipped inside first. She was smaller, quieter, and knew the layout. The floorboards that creaked, the drawer that stuck, the hidden compartment behind Hawkins's desk where she'd once seen him stash papers while spying through this same window. "Here," she breathed, fingers finding the catch. The hidden compartment swung open silently. Inside lay a leather folder, thick with documents. Sarah pulled it out while Caleb kept watch, his silhouette a reassuring shadow by the window. The first paper made her blood run cold. It was a letter written on government stationery detailing arrangements for handling land claims in the territory. As she read further, the scope of Hawkins' corruption became clear. "Caleb," she whispered, "this goes beyond Morgan's Creek." He joined her, reading over her shoulder by the dim moonlight. The documents revealed a network of corrupt officials, stretching from local marshals all the way to the territorial governor's office. Hawkins wasn't just a greedy landowner. He was part of an organized conspiracy to steal land from legitimate settlers across 3 territories. "My family wasn't the first," Sarah said, hands trembling with rage as she found more letters. Each detailed similar accidents, families burned out, witnesses eliminated, claims redistributed to the conspiracy's chosen buyers. "And they won't be the last," Caleb added grimly, "unless we stop it." A floorboard creaked outside the office. They froze, but it was only the wind. Still, they'd pushed their luck far enough. Sarah quickly copied key names and dates into a small notebook while Caleb restored the office to order. As they slipped back into the night, Sarah's mind raced with implications. The marshals arriving wasn't a coincidence, was it? They're planning something bigger. Territory's growing, Caleb replied as they made their way to where Shadow waited. Railroad's coming. Land that's worthless today will be worth fortunes tomorrow. There are dozens of small claims like ours scattered through these hills. Sarah's voice hardened with understanding. All families like mine, working their land honestly. All potential targets, Caleb confirmed, unless they get warning. They mounted Shadow and rode into the darkness, the leather folder secure. In Sarah's saddlebag, its contents would change everything, not just their quest for justice, but the fate of the entire territory. We'll need help, Sarah said as they put distance between themselves and town. We can't fight this many corrupt officials alone. No, Caleb agreed, but there's someone who might be interested in what we found. Federal marshal I served with during the war. Man with a reputation for fighting corruption. Takes a few days to reach him, but he's honest? You're sure? Thomas Kane would die before taking a bribe. There was respect in Caleb's voice, and he's got the authority to make things right, legally. Sarah thought of the families mentioned in those letters, some already destroyed, others still innocent, of the fate being planned for them. How many will die while we wait for legal justice? That's why we work both angles, Caleb said. Kane handles the law. We handle what needs handling in the meantime. Sarah touched the folder, feeling the weight of its secrets. We can save them, the other families, warn them at least. We can. Caleb's voice carried the iron certainty she'd come to trust. But it means going up against more than just Hawkins. You ready for that? Sarah thought of her father's pocket. Watch, stopped at the moment of his death, of her mother's Bible in the mud, of Pete the blacksmith finding his conscience too late. I'm ready, she said. Whatever it takes. The old war horn hung from a peg in Mourning Dove's cabin, its brass surface dulled by age. Young Hawk lifted it carefully from the wall, running his fingers over the dents and scars that marked its history. My grandfather used this to rally warriors against those who would steal our lands, he said, handing it to Sarah. Now it will call others to your cause. 3 days had passed since their discovery of Hawkins' documents. They'd spent them planning, preparing, and most importantly, identifying potential allies. Mourning Dove's network of contacts had proven invaluable. She knew every family, every claim, every story of mysterious accidents in the territory. The Thompson family, Sarah said, marking a spot on their crude map. Their claim borders. The proposed railroad route. They'll be next if we don't warn them. Caleb studied the map, his expression grim. Hawkins' men have been watching their property. But they're not the only ones we need to reach. Young Hawk pointed to other locations. Here and here, small farms all along the railroad's path, all threatened. They'd gathered in Mourning Dove's cabin to finalize their plans. The medicine woman moved between them, laying out supplies for the coming days. Ammunition, medicines, dried food. Some will not believe you, she warned. Fear makes men deaf to truth. Some will, Caleb replied. The ones who've seen signs but were afraid to speak. They just need to know they're not alone. Sarah touched the horn, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. How many can we trust? Start with the Thompsons, young Hawk suggested. Jack Thompson fought in the war. He'll understand the threat. And Rachel Carson, Mourning Dove added. She lost her husband to an accident last spring. She knows. Hawkins' work even if she can't prove it. They worked through the night, identifying potential allies and threats. Young Hawk's knowledge of hidden trails would let them reach the scattered homesteads undetected. Mourning Dove's medicine pouch would help convince the doubtful. She'd treated too many suspicious injuries to be fooled by Hawkins' lies. We'll need a signal, Caleb said. A way to call for help if any family is threatened. The horn, Sarah decided. 3 blasts, like this. She demonstrated, the deep notes echoing through the valley. Those who choose to stand with us will know. Young Hawk agreed, and we'll teach them to use these. He unveiled a cache of weapons, rifles and revolvers, carefully maintained. Where did you get these? Sarah asked, surprised. People pay medicine woman in many ways, Morning Dove said with a slight smile. Some payments I save for times of need. Caleb inspected the weapons with approval. Good, but we'll need more than guns. We'll need everyone's skills. Blacksmiths, hunters, trackers. A network, Sarah understood, like Hawkins has, but for justice instead of greed. The first rays of dawn were touching the mountains when they finished their preparations. Sarah stood outside the cabin, watching the light spread across the valley. In her hand, she held her father's broken pocket watch, a reminder of why they fought. "Ready?" Caleb asked, leading Shadow from the shelter where he'd rested. Sarah nodded, tucking the watch away. "The Thompsons first, then the Carsons. I'll shadow you," young Hawk said, checking his rifle. "Watch the trails. Make sure you're not followed." Morning Dove pressed a fresh medicine pouch into Sarah's hands. "For courage," she said, "and for hope." They mounted up, Sarah and Caleb on Shadow, young Hawk on his own swift pony. The war horn hung at Sarah's side, ready to sound its call for justice. "Remember," Caleb said as they prepared to ride, "we're not just fighting for revenge anymore. We're fighting for everyone Hawkins would destroy." Sarah touched the horn, feeling its potential. "Then let's wake them up, all of them." The new moon cast no light as Sarah crept along the roof of the marshal's office. Below, she could hear Graves and Turner arguing inside, exactly as planned. Young Hawk's diversions had worked perfectly, drawing most of Hawkins' men to the other side of town. "The ledger has to be here somewhere," she whispered, more to steady herself than for Caleb's benefit. He was creating his own distraction near the saloon, keeping the remaining guards occupied. The past week had transformed their small resistance into a force. The Thompsons had joined immediately, Jack's military experience proving invaluable. Rachel Carson brought 4 more families, each with their own stories of Hawkins' corruption. But to truly break his power, they needed proof that even bought lawmen couldn't ignore. Sarah found the loose shingle she'd spotted earlier and carefully lifted it. The office below was dim, lit only by a single lamp. She could see Graves at his desk, arguing with Turner about the ongoing manhunt. "Hawkins is losing patience," Turner growled. "Every day they're out there, more settlers start asking questions." "Then find them!" Graves slammed his hand on the desk. "Before they reach Federal Marshal Kane." Sarah smiled grimly. They didn't know Kane was already riding toward Morgan's Creek, summoned by a letter Caleb had sent days ago. Their task tonight was to ensure he'd find the evidence he needed when he arrived. Movement in the street caught her attention, the signal from young Hawk. 3 guards were headed back early. She had minutes, not the quarter hour they'd planned. Now or never, she breathed and slipped through the gap she'd created. Years of helping her father repair their cabin had taught her to move silently across roof beams. She reached the offices, back storage room undetected. The ledger they sought would be here, documenting every corrupt deal and stolen claim. A crash from the saloon, Caleb's signal that time was running out. Sarah moved faster, searching shelves and boxes. Where would a corrupt marshal hide his most damning evidence? Then she remembered something her father once said. "Men like Hawkins think they're clever, but they all hide things the same way, where they can keep an eye on them." She turned toward Graves's desk, visible through the storage room door. There, a strongbox bolted to the floor beside his chair, the same type her father had used for their gold. Sarah waited until the argument drew both men to the window, then slipped into the office. Her lockpicks, carefully taught by Caleb, made quick work of the strongbox. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with damning details. Property transfers, bribes, murders, disguised as accidents, all recorded in Graves' meticulous hand. Voices approached from the hall. Sarah grabbed the ledger and retreated to the storage room, then up to her rooftop escape route. She was replacing the shingle when the door below burst open. "Someone's been here," Turner's voice carried clearly. "The strongbox." Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She crossed the roof in silence and dropped to the waiting arms of Jack Thompson. who helped her onto his horse. They rode hard through the back alleys, pursued by shouts and random gunfire. Young Hawk's prepared route took them past the Carson homestead, where Rachel's eldest son added covering fire from the shadows. "Did you get it?" Jack asked as they cleared the town limits. Sarah patted her satchel. "Everything Kane needs to bring them down legally." They regrouped at the meeting point, an abandoned mine shaft the resistance had turned into a headquarters. Caleb arrived minutes later, shadow living up to his name in the darkness. "Graves will run straight to Hawkins," he said, dismounting. "Tell him what's missing." "Good." Sarah pulled out the ledger. "Let them know their time's running out." Rachel Carson emerged from the mine shaft, carrying coffee for the returning raiders. More figures followed, other settlers who'd joined. Their cause, each with their own reasons to see Hawkins fall. "This is just the beginning," Sarah told them, holding up the ledger. "Once Kane sees this, he'll bring the law down on all of them. And if he doesn't," someone asked, "then we're the law," Caleb said simply, "until justice is done." The wanted posters appeared at dawn. Crude drawings of Sarah and Caleb with $1,000 reward for each, dead or alive. Hawkins had dropped all pretense of legality now. "He's desperate," Caleb said, studying one of the posters Jackie Thompson had brought to their camp. "Making mistakes." Sarah watched from the mouth of the mine shaft as their allies trained below. Rachel Carson was teaching 3 younger women to shoot, her own experience with a rifle making her a natural instructor. The Thompsons had organized the men into patrol groups, using Caleb's military tactics. "Hawkins sent riders to the next territory," young Hawk reported, returning from his morning scout, "hiring gunmen, professional killers." "How many?" Sarah asked. "At least 20, maybe more coming." He pulled out a rough map. "They're gathering here, at the Canyon Creek station." Caleb's expression darkened. "I know some of those men from the war. Deserters, murderers. They'll burn everything in their path. Then we strike first." Sarah's voice was steel. "Before they can gather their full strength." The resistance had grown stronger over the past days. Word of their raids had spread, bringing more settlers who'd suffered under Hawkins' rule. Each brought their own skills, blacksmiths who could repair weapons, hunters who knew every trail, farmers whose barns became hidden arsenals. "They'll expect us to run," Sarah continued, a plan forming, "to reach for Federal Marshal Kane before the gunmen arrive." "But we're not running," Rachel said, joining them with her rifle. "No," Sarah smiled grimly. "We're going to use Hawkins' own greed against him." She laid out her plan as the others gathered. It was bold, perhaps reckless, but it carried the ring of justice that had drawn them all together. A rider approached their lookout post, one of Rachel's sons. "Hawkins' men burned the Miller place last night. Family got out in time, warned by the horn, but—" "That tears it," Jack Thompson growled. "We move now." Sarah nodded. "Send the signals. Tonight we show them what justice looks like." They spent the day preparing. Young Hawk and his hunters laid false trails to confuse the arriving gunmen. The Carson boys set up ammunition caches along their planned route. Sarah and Caleb rode together, checking each piece of their strategy. "You've grown strong," he said, as they paused atop a ridge. "Your father would be proud." Sarah touched her pocket watch. "He taught me that standing up to evil isn't a choice, it's a duty." Speaking of duty, Caleb pulled out a letter. "Word from Kane. He's a day's ride out coming with federal deputies. Will he be in time? Does it matter?" Caleb's eyes held a familiar fire. "Law's coming tomorrow. Justice comes tonight." They returned to find the resistance ready. 30 riders, each with their own reason to see Hawkins fall. The war horn hung at Sarah's saddle, ready to sound its call to arms. "Remember," she told them, "we're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for every family Hawkins would destroy, for everyone who needs to know that justice still exists in these territories." Jack Thompson raised his rifle. "For Pete, the blacksmith." "For my John," Rachel added, thinking of her murdered husband. Others called out names. Loved ones lost to Hawkins' greed, families displaced, lives destroyed. Each name added steel to their resolve. "Mount up," Caleb ordered. "You all know the plan. Stay smart, stay alive." As they rode out, Sarah saw Mourning Dove watching from the ridgeline. The medicine woman raised her hand in blessing or warning, perhaps both. The sun was setting behind them, painting the sky blood red. Somewhere ahead, Hawkins and his killers waited, not knowing they'd already lost. Justice was coming, carried by 30 riders with vengeance in their hearts and righteousness in their cause. Sarah touched the horn at her saddle. Soon it would sound its call, and the night would echo with the price of tyranny. The false gold map lay on the table in Marshal Graves's office, its carefully aged parchment catching the lamplight. Sarah had drawn it herself, using her father's old survey notes to make it convincing. Every detail was perfect, right down to the coffee stains and worn edges. "Beautiful work," Caleb murmured from his position by the window. They'd slipped into the office an hour after midnight, knowing the marshal's habits. He'd be at the saloon until dawn, drowning his guilt in whiskey. "Think they'll believe it?" Sarah asked, positioning the map so it would be easily spotted. A secret gold mine, forgotten since the war. Caleb's smile was cold. Men like Hawkins can't resist that kind of bait. The map showed a hidden canyon. Real enough, but the gold was fiction. What awaited there was something far more valuable. Justice. Young Hawk appeared at the window like a shadow. "Riders coming. Graves is heading back early." They slipped out the way they'd come, leaving behind not just the map, but whispered rumors that would spread through town by morning. Sarah had planted the first seeds at the general store, speaking just loud enough to be overheard about her father's secret papers. Rachel Carson had done the same at the saloon, letting drop a few choice words about a mine her late husband had mentioned. Dawn found them watching from the ridgeline as Hawkins' men gathered outside his office. Even at this distance, their excitement was visible. "They found it," young Hawk reported, his sharp eyes picking out details. "Graves is showing them the map now." Sarah nodded. "And Hawkins, studying it like a man dying of thirst, looks at water." The rest of their force waited in strategic positions around town. Jack Thompson's veterans were hidden in the livery stable. Rachel Carson and her group watched from the abandoned church. All waited for the signal. "Here come the hired guns," Caleb said, as a new group rode in, hard men with well-worn weapons and dead eyes. Sarah counted them through the spyglass. 23, just like young Hawk said. "They'll want to move fast," Caleb predicted, "before anyone else learns about the mine." He was right. Within hours, Hawkins had assembled his full force, his own men, plus the hired killers. They rode out at noon, following the map's trail toward the canyon. 48 riders, Sarah noted, more than we expected. "Numbers won't help them in the canyon." Caleb touched the horn at his saddle. "Every man we pulled from their ranks is worth 10 of theirs." They'd spent days preparing the canyon, turning its natural features into a trap. The Thompson veterans had laid false trails and hidden barriers. Young Hawk's hunters had prepared rock slides that could be triggered with a single shot. The Carson family had positioned shooters at every advantage point. "Caleb," Sarah said as they mounted up to follow Hawkins' force. "If this works, when it works, she corrected, there will be killing, a lot of it." He studied her face. "Having doubts? No." She touched her father's watch. "Just making peace with what needs to be done." They rode in. Silence, following tracks that led to destiny. The resistance fighters fell in behind them, 30 riders becoming one force, one purpose. Near sunset, they reached their first observation point. Below, Hawkins' men had made camp at the canyons, mouth too eager to wait for morning. "Look at them," young Hawk said with disgust. "No guards, no patrols. Gold fever has made them stupid." Sarah watched through the spyglass as Hawkins studied the map by firelight. Turner paced nearby, his bandaged hand a constant reminder of their first encounter. The hired guns sat apart, cleaning their weapons with professional care. "They think they're hunting us," Rachel said, her rifle ready. "Don't realize it's the other way around." Jack Thompson returned from his final inspection of their preparations. "Everything's set. We can trigger the trap at any time." Sarah looked at their gathered allies. Farmers turned warriors, women who'd lost husbands, young men defending their homes. Each face showed the same conviction she felt in her heart. "Get some rest," she ordered. "Tomorrow we finish this." As darkness fell, Sarah and Caleb made one final check of their positions. The canyon walls rose like dark wings against the star-filled sky. "Your father," Caleb said suddenly. What would he think of all this? Sarah considered the question. He believed in the law, in doing things right. She touched the watch again. But he also believed that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. Sometimes doing right means standing up, whatever the cost. Caleb nodded. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will come soon enough." But Sarah stood a moment longer, watching Hawkins' campfires below. Tomorrow would bring blood and judgment. Tonight was for remembering why they fought. Dawn painted the canyon walls gold, a final irony, as Hawkins's men rode into the trap. Sarah watched them approach, the blood-stained bandana at her neck, a reminder of all that had led to this moment. Beside her, Caleb raised his spyglass. "Hawkins has the hired guns in front," he reported. "Smart. They know how to look for trouble. But they're looking for the wrong kind," Sarah said, touching the horn at her side. The canyon narrowed ahead, its walls rising steep and deadly. Young Hawk's hunters had spent days loosening rocks above, preparing heaven's own ammunition. The Thompson veterans had constructed subtle barriers that would funnel the riders exactly where they wanted them. "They're reaching the first marker," Rachel Carson whispered from her position. Other resistance fighters waited in hidden spots along the canyon walls, rifles ready. Sarah raised the horn to her lips. The first note echoed off the canyon walls, not a warning this time, but a signal to their forces. The battle was about to begin. Hawkins' column had stretched out in the narrow passage. The hired guns led, followed by his regular men, with Hawkins himself protected in the middle. Turner rode near him, his bandaged hand holding reins awkwardly. "Now!" Caleb commanded. Sarah blew the horn again, 3 sharp blasts. Above the front of the column, young Hawk and his hunters pushed the first rocks. The cascade started small, but grew quickly. Horses screamed, men shouted, and chaos erupted as the front of the column disappeared in dust and stone. "They're turning back," someone shouted, but there was nowhere to go. While the front of the column was being crushed, Jack Thompson's veterans had quietly blocked the canyon's entrance. Hawkins' forces were trapped between rock and rifle. "Ambush!" Turner's voice carried clearly. "It's a trap!" The hired guns reacted first, their experience showing as they sought cover, but the canyon offered little protection. Rachel Carson's group opened fire from concealed positions, their rifles speaking in a language of vengeance. Sarah watched. Through the spyglass, as Hawkins realized his situation, the man's face transformed from confusion to rage to fear in moments. "Graves!" he shouted. "Get us out of here!" But the marshal was already down, clutching a bleeding shoulder. The hired guns were dying one by one, their skill useless against invisible attackers shooting from above. "Sarah!" Caleb's warning came just as Turner spotted them. Bullets sparked off the rocks around their position. She rolled to better cover, then took careful aim with her rifle. Caleb had taught her well. Her first shot took Turner's hat off. Her second took his remaining good hand. The battle devolved into brutal close quarters, as some of Hawkins' men tried to climb the canyon walls. Young Hawk's hunters met them with knives and clubs, the fighting desperate and personal. "He's running!" Rachel's cry drew Sarah's attention back to Hawkins. The man had found a narrow trail and was trying to escape alone, leaving his men to die. Not this time. Sarah shot his horse from under him. Hawkins tumbled hard but got up running. "Go!" Caleb said. "This is yours to finish." Sarah scrambled down a path they'd prepared, cutting off Hawkins' escape. She found him trapped against the canyon wall, his fine clothes dust-covered and torn. "Should have killed you with your parents," he snarled, drawing his pistol. Sarah smiled coldly. "Like you killed all the others? Pete the blacksmith? John? Carson? All the families who stood in your way?" "Business," he spat. "Just business." "No." She raised her rifle. "This is justice." His shot went wide. Hers didn't. Above them, the battle was ending. Most of Hawkins' men had surrendered once their leader fled. The hired guns had died fighting, their professional pride their final mistake. Sarah climbed back to where Caleb waited. Together, they surveyed the aftermath. The canyon floor was littered with bodies and bloody bandanas, markers of the cost of justice. "Marshal Kane will be here soon," Caleb said quietly. "Let him come." Sarah looked at the surviving prisoners, including Turner and Graves. "We have witnesses now, and evidence." She patted the saddlebag containing the ledger. "The law can have what's left." Rachel Carson approached, a cut on her cheek but fire still in her eyes. "Riders coming from town. More of Hawkins' men?" "No," young Hawk called from his lookout. "Different army uniforms, a marshal's badge." "Kane," Caleb confirmed. "Right on time to clean up." Sarah watched the dust cloud approaching. The law was coming at last, but justice had already been served. She thought of her father's pocket watch, marking the moment of his death. Now it could mark the moment of his vindication. The sun climbed higher, turning the canyon's blood-stained walls to gold, real gold this time, bought with courage and sacrifice instead of greed and murder. Federal Marshal Thomas Kane sat at what had been Hawkins' desk, methodically working through the stack of new land deeds. Each document represented a property being returned to its rightful owners. Justice given legal form at last. Sarah watched from the doorway as families came to claim their papers. Rachel Carson, tears in her eyes, holding the deed her husband had died protecting. The Thompson family, their claim now legally expanded to include the land they'd actually worked. Others she'd never met, drawn by word of Hawkins' fall and Kane's reputation for fairness. "Quite a mess you cleaned up," Kane said when the last family had left. He was older than Caleb, but carried the same air of quiet authority. The silver badge on his chest caught the afternoon light. "Though your methods were unconventional." "Justice takes different forms out here," Caleb replied. He stood by the window, watching the street where workers were taking down the wanted posters. "You know that, Tom." "I do." Kane lifted the captured ledger. "This, though, this is gold. Names, dates, bribes, murders, everything we need to break the whole corrupt network." Sarah touched her father's pocket watch. "How far does it go?" "All the way to the territorial governor's office." Kane's expression was grim but satisfied. "Arrests are already being made. Marshal Graves was just the start." Through the window, they could see Turner and the other survivors being loaded into prison wagons. They'd face trial in the territorial capital, far from any local influence. "And the families?" Sarah asked. "The ones who fought with us? Officially?" Kane shuffled some papers. "I arrived just in time to prevent a range war between settlers. Found evidence of corruption. Made necessary arrests. No charges against any of your people." Sarah nodded, understanding the gift he was giving them. The resistance fighters would remain anonymous, their actions covered by the blanket of official discretion. "Unofficially," Kane continued, "I'd say they've more than earned their lands. New deeds will reflect actual boundaries, not Hawkins' creative surveying." A commotion outside drew their attention. The prison wagon carrying Turner had stopped. Through the barred window, Sarah could see his face, twisted with hate as he caught sight of her. "You're dead!" he shouted. "All of you! When I get out!" The wagon lurched forward, carrying his threats away. Sarah touched the bandana at her neck, remembering blood and justice in the canyon. "He won't get out," Kane assured her. "None of them will. The evidence is too strong." "Evidence is one thing," Caleb said, "but judges can be bought." Kane smiled thinly. "Not these judges. This goes beyond corruption now. It's an embarrassment to the territory. The governor himself is under investigation. Change is coming." Sarah thought of all the changes that had already come. The resistance fighters returning to their farms, carrying new confidence with their new deeds. Young Hawk and his hunters accepted openly in town now, their skills respected instead of feared. Mourning Dove treating patients in a proper clinic, instead of hiding in her cabin. Speaking of change, Kane said, pulling out one final document. The town needs a new marshal. Someone who knows the people, understands justice. He looked meaningfully at Caleb. No, Caleb shook his head. Those days are done, but... He glanced at Sarah. She felt the weight of their gazes. Me? Why not? Kane held up the badge. You've proven yourself. The people trust you. And sometimes the law needs someone who remembers what justice really means. Sarah looked at Caleb, who nodded encouragingly. She thought of her father, who believed in the law, of her mother, who believed in doing right, of Pete the blacksmith, who died trying to choose justice over fear. Under 2 conditions, she said finally. Name them. First, Caleb stays on as advisor. This town needs his experience. Done. And second, Sarah touched the horn at her belt. The resistance network stays in place, hidden, quiet, but ready, in case the law ever fails again. Kane studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Wise precaution. The law's only as strong as the people enforcing it. He held out the badge. Welcome to the job, Marshal Mitchell. The badge felt heavy in her hand. Not a burden, but a responsibility. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the town returning to normal, but it was a new normal, built on justice instead of fear. The foundation stone of the new community center bore a simple inscription, built in memory of those who stood for justice. Sarah ran her fingers over the carved letters as the autumn sun warmed her back. 3 months had passed since Hawkins' fall, and Morgan's Creek was becoming a different place. The sound of hammers and saws filled the air as workers raised the building's frame. Jack Thompson directed the construction, his military precision ensuring every beam and board fit perfectly. Rachel Carson's oldest son was apprenticing with the new blacksmith, learning to craft tools instead of weapons. Making good progress, Caleb said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Sarah, his eyes approving as he surveyed the work. Town's changing. People are changing, Sarah corrected, accepting the coffee. Her marshal's badge caught the sunlight. They're not afraid anymore. It showed in 100 small ways. Settlers and natives trading openly in the market square that Mourning Dove had helped establish. Children playing freely in the streets, no longer kept close out of fear. Even the saloon had transformed, becoming more meeting house than den of violence. Deputy says the railroad company sent new surveyors, Caleb reported. Honest ones, this. And dime, offering fair prices for land they need. Sarah nodded. Kane's influence. He's made it clear the old ways won't be tolerated. Young Hawk rode up, no longer needing to hide his approach to town. The last of Hawkins' hidden caches is cleared. On 3 more deeds, Kane's office is tracking down the rightful owners. The foundation stone had been laid on the site of Hawkins' former office, a deliberate choice. Where corruption had once ruled, the community would now gather. The building would house a school, a library, and meeting rooms where all voices could be heard. Sarah, Rachel called from the construction site, need your opinion on something. They were installing a memorial wall, listing the names of those lost to Hawkins' greed. Sarah's parents would be there, alongside John Carson, Pete the blacksmith, and others, whose stories had emerged since the truth came to light. Make sure there's room to add names, Sarah said, studying the wall. Not just victims, but those who fought back. This place should remember both the cost and the courage. Rachel squeezed her hand in understanding. They had all lost family, but they had gained something too, a community bound by more than geography. The afternoon brought more signs of change. A stage arrived carrying new settlers, drawn by reports of fair land prices and honest leadership. Sarah watched young Hawk help an elderly couple with their bags, while Thompson's men unloaded freight, marked for the new general store. Never thought I'd see the day, the stage driver remarked to no one in particular. used to dread this stop. Now it's the most peaceful town on the route. Peace had come at a price, but it was building on a solid foundation. The resistance networks remained, quiet but vigilant. The war horn hung in Sarah's office, a reminder that justice sometimes needed defenders. "Marshal!" A boy ran up, message in hand. "Telegram from Marshal Kane!" Sarah read it with growing satisfaction. The territorial governor had been convicted, along with 3 judges and a dozen other officials. Turner and Graves had testified, trying to save themselves, and revealed even more corruption. "Good news?" Caleb asked. "The best kind. Justice is spreading." She handed him the telegram. "Kane says similar networks are forming in other territories, people standing up, refusing to be victims." The sun was setting as the workers finished. For the day. Sarah stood watching them leave, thinking of how far they'd come. Her father's pocket watch marked different time now, not the moment of his death, but the hours of a community's rebirth. "We'll finish the roof tomorrow," Thompson called as he passed. "Ready for that tin star to have a proper home." Sarah touched her badge, remembering the weight of the war horn, the kick of a rifle, the heat of righteous flame. Some wounds would never fully heal, but the scars were becoming marks of pride instead of pain. 1 year to the day after Hawkins' fall, Sarah stood before the memorial plaque in the completed community center. The morning light through the high windows illuminated the names of the fallen, but also a new addition, a list of the resistance. Fighters who had risked everything for justice. The town had grown almost beyond recognition. The railroad had brought new settlers, honest commerce and prosperity distributed fairly among all. Where Hawkins had once ruled through fear, a council, now governed through cooperation. Young Hawk and Jack Thompson served alongside Rachel Carson and other community leaders, their different perspectives strengthening every decision. "Thinking deep thoughts, Marshal?" Caleb's familiar voice drew her attention. He'd traded his duster for more civilized attire, but the watchful alertness remained in his eyes. "Remembering," Sarah replied, touching her father's pocket watch. "Hard to believe it's been a year. Time moves differently when you're building something instead of burning it down." They walked together through the bustling morning streets. Children ran past on their way to the new school, where Morning Dove taught traditional medicine alongside modern subjects. The marketplace hummed with activity, farmers, traders, and craftsmen from all backgrounds working together. "Kane's coming for the anniversary," Sarah said, "bringing news from other territories." Caleb nodded. "The changes are spreading, 3 more corrupt networks broken in the past year. All it takes is people willing to stand up." Their example had inspired others. Small resistance groups had formed throughout the frontier, supported quietly by Kane and others who understood that justice sometimes needed unofficial defenders. The Warhorn's call had echoed far beyond Morgan's Creek. They passed the site, where Sarah's family home had burned. A new house stood there now, built by the community for a family who had lost everything to another corrupt scheme 2 territories over. The father worked as Thompson's foreman, the mother helped in Morning Dove's clinic, and their children played freely in the yard. "Your parents would be proud," Caleb said softly, "not just of what you did, but of what you built after." Sarah touched her marshal's badge. "We all built it. Everyone who chose to stand up instead of standing aside." The morning council meeting brought more signs of progress. Rachel Carson reported on the new irrigation system that would help small farmers compete with larger ranches. Young Hawk detailed plans for joint hunting parties, sharing skills and resources. Thompson discussed expanding the school to include practical training for all who wanted to learn. But they hadn't forgotten the price of peace. The resistance network remained vigilant. Its members spread throughout the territory. The war horn hung in Sarah's office, cleaned and ready. Justice, they had learned, required both law and courage, both memory and hope. "To the fallen," Sarah proposed at the evening gathering, raising her glass alongside the other survivors and builders of their new community. "To the future," Caleb added, and all drank to both. In the dying light, Sarah watched her town, for it was truly their town now, settle into evening routines. Shops closed, families gathered, and peace wrapped around them like a warm blanket. But underneath lay steel, tempered by fire and sacrifice, ready if ever needed again. The pocket watch ticked steadily, marking not the end of something, but the beginning. Sarah's polished marshal's badge caught the morning sun as she pinned it on, its gleam a daily reminder of both authority and responsibility. 2 years had passed since Justice first rode into Morgan's Creek on a midnight stallion. Now that Justice wore many faces, law and memory, peace and readiness, she crossed the street to where Caleb waited with Shadow, both showing signs of their years, but losing none of their strength. The stallion's coat was flecked with grey, but his eyes remained bright and watchful. "Ready for your rounds?" Caleb asked, though he already knew the answer. These morning rides had become their ritual, checking not just the town, but the deeper peace they'd built. Always. Sarah mounted her own horse, a gift from the Thompson Ranch, bred from Shadow's line. Kane's letter mentioned 3 more towns following our example. "Good." Caleb fell in beside her as they rode. "Change comes slow, but it comes." They passed the schoolhouse, where Rachel Carson was already teaching the morning session. Through the window, Sarah glimpsed young Hawk demonstrating traditional tracking methods to an eager audience of both settler and native children. The community center hosted its daily bustle of activity. The memorial wall had gained a new purpose. Beside the names of the fallen, they now recorded acts of courage and justice, building a living history of their transformation. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah said as they reached the town limits, what my father would think of all this. He'd see a town where law means justice, not power, where people stand together instead of standing aside." Caleb smiled. "I'd say that's worth the price we paid." They rode past flourishing farms and ranches, seeing the fruits of fair distribution and honest work. The railroad brought prosperity now, not corruption. The territory's new governor had learned the lesson written in blood and courage. Justice wasn't just a word, but a promise that needed keeping. At the canyon's entrance they paused. Time had softened its scars, but the memory remained sharp. The war horn still hung at Sarah's saddle, its call unneeded but unsilenced. "Marshal!" A rider approached, one of young Hawk's scouts. "Travelers coming, a family driven out by land grabbers, 3 territories over." Sarah exchanged glances with Caleb. Some battles never truly ended, but neither did the will to fight them. "Bring them in," she ordered. "Tell them Morgan's Creek welcomes those who seek justice, and tell them its story." The scout rode off, carrying a message that had spread far beyond their small town. It wasn't just about one community's stand against corruption anymore. It was about hope, about the power of people choosing to rise above fear. Sarah touched her father's pocket watch, then her badge, feeling the weight of both history and promise. The morning sun painted the land gold, real gold, earned by courage and kept by vigilance. "Come on," she said to Caleb. "Let's show them what justice looks like." They rode toward the future, leaving hoofprints in soil that had been sanctified by sacrifice and redeemed by determination. Behind them, Morgan's Creek stood as a beacon, proof that even in the darkest times, justice could prevail if good people found the courage to stand together.